We are at the top of the hour. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carol Walker. I am the Executive Director of the Rocky Mountain Insurance Association. On behalf of our membership, our Legislative Grassroots Network, and our generous sponsors, I would like to welcome you all to this exciting event. It is part of our Legislative Grassroots series that we're doing, but today we're featuring an exciting new rollout by the National Fire Protection Association for their Outthink Wildfire Call to Action strategy to reduce wildfire across the country and here in Colorado. With that, I would like to welcome everyone. We have an impressive group of more than 100 insurance agents, our employees. We have our wildfire stakeholder partners, local, state elected officials. We have our regulators from the Colorado Division of Insurance on, and also invited legislators and staff. We know they were still on the floor up to just a short time ago. So we would welcome them as they join us and are able to put their names in the chat box. We also have our lobbyists keeping an eagle eye out. We'd like to really recognize any elected officials that we have on the phone, because this Outthink Wildfire strategy really is a chance for us at every level of government and stakeholders to talk about policy. So with that, as I said, I am Carol Walker. In my role as Executive Director of RMIA, I've spent the past 2 decades really working on recovery, response, and preparedness with our government and stakeholder partners. And with all of those years, there's only one thing that I do know for sure. It's conversations like this one that helps us find common ground and build the alliances we need to help put resources in the hands of both our communities and our individual homeowners to take the proper mitigation steps to reduce the risk of wildfire. Like you, we in the insurance industry have walked those burned out foundations with our customers, and we're committed to doing everything we can to prevent those fires from happening in the first place. As you know, most insurance companies do require wildfire mitigation to get and keep affordable insurance. And we know that we need to give a voice to mitigation and the right mitigation to help that happen. So today is one of those conversations. We also know that it is the way we're going to best keep that private, stable, competitive insurance market in Colorado. So we're excited to have a very impressive panel with us today. We have the president of the National Fire Protection Association, Jim Pauley. We also have Roy Wright. He is a CEO and president of the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. And we have Jim Webster, who's the program coordinator for Wildfire Partners in Boulder County. We're going to kick things off with Jim Pauley, president of NFPA, to talk to us and share their call to action strategy for Outthink Wildfire. Jim, I'll turn things over to you.
Well, Carol, thank you for inviting me here today. And thank you for your leadership that you've shown in Colorado and with the insurance industry. I agree with you. These conversations are just so critically important for us to really take a step back and continue to drive a lot of the things that have been happening, but also look at them perhaps through somewhat of a new lens. And I'm really honored to be part of this special event. For many years, wildfire has been a major concern for myself, for NFPA, and I know people on this call feel exactly the same way. And I'm pleased to be able to come together with you to share this important conversation that I know you've been having in Colorado, and we're excited to be a part of that conversation. And I want to start a little bit by maybe setting the overall stage. Probably no facts and figures that you all don't already know, but are often worth repeating because they really drive home the point. For the past 3 years, we in the US have seen 40,000 structures destroyed. We've seen 100 fatalities. We've seen $40 billion in insured losses due to wildfire. And the problem is, this is not an anomaly, but it's a grim look into the near future. And each year in the US, we spend $2 billion supporting fire suppression, yet structure loss due to wildfire has increased more than 160%. And as the average number of acres burned each year rises over time, we know that communities in wildfire hazard zones can't just continue down the same path that they have. They've got to adopt practices that will lower the risk to lives, homes, businesses, and to help improve overall prosperity, or we're going to face still an unmanageable loss of life and property due to wildfires. And what we've been doing in the past, some of it's been working, but largely for the overall wildfire problem, we need a new approach. And that approach is what we at NFPA have called Outthink Wildfire. And we announced it earlier this month. And really around Outthink Wildfire, it lays out 5 key policy changes that need to be made at federal, state, and local levels. We believe that all levels of government, and I do honestly believe that government support in this process is important. They're not alone, but their support in this process is going to be really critical, and that the government's got to support these goals if we're going to reduce the billions of dollars of loss that wildfires generate each year. So what's the foundation of this strategy? And so, well, let me explain. We came at this with Outthink Wildfire really rooted in what we consider 2 key facts. The first is, the fact is that wildfires are going to happen. Whether they're caused by nature, by people, by the built environment, we are going to have wildfires. The second fact is that fire departments, for the heroes that they are and for the fabulous job that they do, we know are never going to be able to save all of the property that's in the path of a wildfire. And while we know voluntary individual and community actions have to continue to play a role in the overall efforts that we can use to reverse this course of loss, the action alone, that action by communities, is not enough to dramatically change the outcomes from wildfires in the wildland-urban interface. So let me give you the 5 tenets around Outthink Wildfire. And I'm going to say up front, I don't think any of these are going to be new to you. What we've talked about is putting these together in a policy approach where really all 5 of these need to be as part of the plan of attack and not just any one of those by itself. And the first tenet is we've got to require all homes and businesses that are in the WUI to be more resistant to ignition from wildfire embers and flames. Roy's organization has done some fabulous research that identifies some simple things that can be done even to homes to help make them more resistant to embers and flames. There are 44.8 million homes across 70,000 communities that are in the WUI today. And changes that are made to both the home and the surrounding property, as you all know, as insurers, that can greatly reduce the risk of structural ignition during a wildfire event. This is going to require solutions, some that need to be able to be retrofitted into existing properties. These retrofits and mitigation measures, what we're saying is they need to be supported, they need to be incentivized, and they need to be mandated where necessary. And I think often that words around mandated tends to frighten a lot of people, but we know from our research, we know from watching these events occur, that the way you get holistic action is to make sure that people understand what it is that they need to comply with. That brings me to my second tenet. That's around current codes and standards, as well as standards around sound land use practices. These standards need to be used, and more importantly, they need to be enforced. Because the key to reducing risk is also ensuring that new development and that rebuilding that happens in the WUI, that they are designed, sited, constructed, and maintained to resist ignition from wildfire embers and flames. And state and local governments have to embrace these tools to help assess the wildfire hazards, as well as regulations, codes and standards, and related items that are needed to mitigate those hazards. The third tenet around Outthink Wildfire is that fire departments that serve communities in the WUI, they have to be prepared to respond safely and effectively to wildfire. I have heard departments say over and over again, we go in to save people. We don't go in to save property when we're talking about a wildfire event. With so many lives and homes to protect, fire departments for those communities need the appropriate training and the protective equipment to be effective. According to our latest report titled The Fourth Needs Assessment of the U.S. Fire Service, we found that only 37% of all fire departments reported that their firefighters have had wildland firefighting training. And only 32% reported that they had enough wildland fire personnel protective equipment for each member of their department. Those numbers are staggeringly low. Firefighters are going to be much less successful where there's training and equipment that's missing, and they're putting themselves and citizens at risk. The fourth tenet in Outthink Wildfire is that, and this will be no news to any of you in Colorado, we have to, and government needs to increase the resources for vegetative fuel management. I know that's a big discussion in Colorado, and in a lot of ways, there are parts of Colorado that have led the way, but We know across the US, due to decades of fire suppression and past land management decisions, there are over 100 million acres of just federal land that are at high or severe risk of wildfire. To date, US government's funded about $6 billion in fuel treatments, relying on methods like mechanical thinning and prescribed burning. This investment translates to a rate of treatment of about 3 million acres per year. The experts estimate that we need to be treating 6.8 to 12 million acres per year if we're going to restore and maintain these lands. So more funding and more support for coordination is severely needed. And then finally, the last tenet, but equally as important. The public needs to understand their role in taking action to reducing wildfire risk. I mentioned the role of government officials, from politicians to foresters, in tackling the wildfire challenge, but the public has to take responsibility for their own safety as well. I know there are lots of people and communities in Colorado that take an active role in working to mitigate their homes and neighborhoods, and that's a crucial piece of this. The homeowners are initiating retrofits and maintaining ignition-resistant properties, community members that heed emergency orders to evacuate when those come, and everyone exercising fire safety on the landscape. These are all essential actions that we need to achieve the gains in saving lives and property. Now, we know that reaching these goals will take time, because all 5 of those tenets that we've outlined have to work together, because it's an and, not an or, between each one of those. The key to ending destruction of communities, it's doing what you're doing right now. It's to start now. No single group we know can do it alone. We've got to pursue collaboration. We've got to advocate for change, and we have to be willing to call on effective practices that we know will make a difference. So I want to say again, thank you, Carol. Thank you to the Rocky Mountain Insurance Association for pulling this event together. It is these type of events and conversations that are going to move this effort forward. Now, if you want to know more about Outthink Wildfire itself, you can go to nfpa.org/wildfire policy. So again, thank you. And I'm looking forward to our discussion today about the challenges facing Colorado and the work that we have done and can continue to do together. Thanks, Carol.
Thank you so much, Jim. And if you go to that link that Jim just pointed out, there is an insurance white paper that's excellent. And it's an excellent resource for our insurance agents to be talking to their customers. We know you're an important voice to those homeowners to do those right mitigation steps. With that, our next esteemed panelist is, I always get the question in Colorado, I talk to a lot of wildfire practitioner groups. Carol, what does the insurance industry expect? What mitigation requirements do they base their programs on? What community programs do they support when it comes to wildfire mitigation? And I say the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. Our next panelist is the CEO and president of the IBHS, Roy Wright, and he's going to share with us the science really behind what's driving mitigation across the country and here in Colorado. Roy, I'll turn it over to you.
Carol, thank you so much for having us. And it's always great to be with both Jim and Jim as laid out today. So I'm going to try to do something fairly remarkable, which is introduce and lay down some of the pieces of the science and do all of it in just about 7 minutes or so, right? You can get the Wildfire 100, 200, and 400 level courses all here. Yeah, what is so essential and what we love so much about the work that FEA is doing on Outthink Wildfire is really bringing to the forefront the need to take action across all of the domains. And I'll show you some of those direct connections here in the next just few moments. Many of you are very close to the elements of wildfire, and for some that are joining us today, some of these elements may be a new topic. So I want to lay down just a couple of fundamentals. The first of which deals with embers, because we know that embers are responsible for up to 90% of home ignitions during a wildfire, and some of those can just pick up and loft a short distance, and others can pick up, whether this thing is the size of a thumbnail or the size of your hand, and loft for a half a mile. And so we think about this, and there's been some great work done as we think about those buffer zones, the 0 to 5 feet, the 5 to 30, and the 30 to 100. This is important, but when you get into a suburban context and you start looking at 5 feet, 30 feet, 100, you are in your next door neighbor's kitchen when you're 30 feet away. And if you look at 100-foot kind of buffer zone, you may bring 5 or 6 homes in, which is to say the actions you take related to the embers and what they will do to your home are indeed paramount. But if embers come and take root and find a very hospitable resting place in your neighbor's yard, they can catch fire. And then we can begin that domino effect that we see happen in so many of these wildfires that turn catastrophic. So we do research here at IBHS on the physical elements to do, as well as how those social dimensions play out. And so just last summer, we did 2 focus groups. We did a set of them in California and another set in Colorado. So let me start with the California side of the equation. When we talk to Californians who experienced wildfires in 2017 and 18 and 2020, they don't need to be reminded of their risk. They know it can happen to them because they experience the fires and the smoke and the ash and this kind of piece on a recurring basis. Even when the fire's not in their backyard, they're looking for ways to take action, and they want to make sure they know what exactly they can do. And they really do turn to questions about affordability and feasibility to do that action. But when we turned and had these conversations with Colorado homeowners across the state, we saw something different. In our focus groups, most of these Coloradans did not perceive the risk in their own backyard. They acknowledged that the region had risk, but it may be 15 or 20 miles away. And so they would see their kind of sense of the region's risk at a medium level, but their specific individual risk, well, they viewed it pretty low. Now, just weeks after we did these focus groups, the Pine Gulch fire occurred, the Cameron Peak fire, and then the East Troublesome fire all moved forward. Colorado's 3 largest fires in state history burned in 2020. It becomes this way that says, okay, what can we do and how can we lay out a roadmap to help people know a way forward? What does the insurance industry bring to bear, to use Carol's point? And so at IBHS, we've been around for more than 40 years and have been operating our research center for the last dozen, looking at a set of perils, including wildfire. And we look at things like decks and vents and the spacing of structures and vegetation and ancillary buildings. And we look at a whole set of elements that play out in that space. So we went out and told our team to go to work, and they came up with 8 streams of mitigation efforts. And when they did it, it looked like this. Layers upon layers of nested trees that were there. And I said, that's all fine and good. I'm glad to have the specific information. But what I really need is a roadmap. I need a way to digest this down so people can understand it. And so you can go to wildfire-ready.com and you'll see our work in this space where we've laid out the actions in terms of how to start here, how to keep it going, obviously level it up, and then finally those last miles. As we look across each one of these elements, there's different levels of effort that are required, different financial points that are in play. And I'll point you back to the websites and you can see all of the details. But back to the Outthink wildfire, that first lane that talked about the specific actions that homeowners need to take. So I want to take just the elements from start here. Fire rated roof coverings. Good news is almost everyone has them, but it is a requirement, and there are a small set of people who still like their wood shake shingles, whether on the sides or on their roofs. But the one that we are seeing plays a predominant role is the kind of vegetation, particularly within the first 5 feet up next to a structure, as well as then from 5 to 30. This piece really is paramount. We think about tree canopy in this space, as well as the kind of vegetation whether that's dry organic stuff that is just blown up against, or it may be mulch that was laid down, or it may be the various kinds of landscaping that is there. That first 5 feet is so crucial in terms of a home ignition zone. We turn to things like what's under the deck. All too often, we start seeing things accumulate under the deck. Decks have a particular kind of risk they bring to bear, and particularly when fire gets underneath, how that can then start initiating a cascade of loss inside a given home, as well as in the surrounding neighborhood. And then, how do we deal with the vents in the attic or undercrawl space? I think about the glass fire that happened in California last fall. The number of times, even when fire suppression crews got there, by which they lost the top floor of the house because the embers came in through the attic vent, nested. All this, though, comes in because it really is a system. It is a system that requires vigilance at every single level. And so as I wrap up my initial comments here, and I look forward to the kind of questions, we can go into lots and lots of details, I go back to the 5th lane of Outthink Wildfire. It's about public understanding, and public understanding that leads to very specific actions. We need to help people understand that it is about their structure and their neighbors and the broader ecosystem that requires attention. It requires us to take an all of the above approach. Here today, you get a sense of that. You get a sense of that in terms of the national policy level, the science. I'm really excited because there's one particular community in Colorado who has done this really, really well. So let me hand it back to Carol as we continue with our time today.
Thanks so much, Roy. And again, if you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box. We are monitoring those. We'll try to answer those even as we continue through the program, but also we're going to leave time for Q&A as well. So make sure you're using that chat box. Our third panelist is Jim Webster. He's the program coordinator for Wildfire Partners. And Jim, I would just like to start off, and our deepest condolences to you and the community of Boulder. If you want any evidence of Boulder's ability to rise from adversity, is when we had our devastating wildfires, a 4 Mile Canyon fire back in 2010, and then into Waldo Canyon, Black Forest Fire. Wildfire Partners emerged from those devastating wildfires really as what we consider the gold standard for community mitigation programs. Jim came to me 8 years ago and said, we want the insurance industry to be a true partner in this. I serve on his advisory committee, along with several of my insurance board members on that advisory committee. And it really does show us that the science from IBHS, the concepts from NFPA and Outthink Wildfire and NFPA's FireWise program can be put into action and have staying power. So with that, Jim, I will turn it over to you to talk to us about Wildfire Partners.
Thanks very much, Carol. I appreciate those words. I thought I'd start off here with, in honor of March Madness, a picture of a CU basketball court, but this is obviously not a basketball game. This is the community meeting during the 4 Mile fire evacuation. And it was a very large, intense, one of the most difficult meetings our elected officials had to conduct. So for all those elected officials on the call, sort of an incentive of why we need to take action before wildfire occurs. I'm going to talk about Wildfire Partners. I'm just going to touch a little bit on the program. There's a website there where you can find out more information. But as Carol, Roy, and Jim mentioned, this program aligns very nicely with NFPA's goals, policies 1, 2, and 5. Next slide. Our goal in Wildfire Partners is very similar to that of Outthink Wildfire. We want all our homeowners in high wildfire risk areas to perform mitigation based on the IBHS science for as long as they live in their homes. Now, this is a bold, audacious goal. If you go back to the previous slide, great. And it conflicts in part of our history and our culture as a home rule state, as a state that honors private property and independence. This goal of getting all of the homeowners in the WUI to take action for the long term is not easy. So I don't want to imply that this is easy work, but it doesn't mean that we can't attempt, and we need to devote a lot of time, energy, and really outthink wildfire. It's not an easy solution. There are certainly lots of challenges at the local community level. Representing local government here, Boulder County, we understand there are a lot of challenges, but the need for these homeowners to take action based on the previous presentations you just saw, really believe this is the goal that we need, that's consistent with Outthink Wildfire. Next slide. So Wildfire Partners is a certification program at the parcel level. We know about FireWise working at the community level. We work at the parcel level with individual homeowners. And I'll just briefly outline the process. Homeowners apply online. If they meet the criteria and we have room for them, they're accepted into the program. They receive an on-site assessment with a professional wildfire mitigation specialist, looking at all their vulnerabilities, all their risks, getting educated on wildfire behavior, how homes are destroyed during wildfires, what actions to take. So that on-site assessment turns into a customized report with photos and a checklist, action items for them to take. They then work on those mitigation measures over time, maybe with contractors, maybe doing the work themselves. Then we'll come back and inspect. And if they pass that inspection, if they've completed their requirements, they receive a certificate and a yard sign and be recognized for that effort. And then of course it's ongoing, right? This is long-term. So we come back and recertify over time. So that's a quick thumbnail of the program. Next slide. As Carol mentioned, and as the name implied, Wildfire Partners includes many partners. We started off by working with IBHS, using their science, working with FPAs, and working with insurance companies, because we have that same goal. Some people ask, why are we working with insurance companies? To us, it's very obvious. If our goal is to get everybody to do mitigation, the insurance companies are doing that once and the local government's doing twice, that's twice as much work. To get everybody involved is a lot of work anyway. Why not work together to reach all the homeowners that need to mitigate? So seeing as a natural alliance of working together with large groups of partners. You know, we have fire districts, State Forest Service, US Forest Service, lots and lots of community groups, realtors. We got the Youth Corps mentioned here. And we need a lot of work done, so we need a workforce. So the idea of coming together in partnership, so we're not, having multiple efforts out there. It's really hard for homeowners and the uncertainty if everyone's coming to them with different programs and different ideas. So we've come together in Boulder County under Wildfire Partners to try to work together to provide this assistance to homeowners. Next slide. And so, one of the benefits of Wildfire Partners and one of our core principles is we really want to provide that good technical assistance and support to homeowners. This can take a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of money. Yes, some of the measures are simple, but some are more complicated. It's not enough to send someone a letter. It's how you educate, how you follow up. So I've talked about the customized report with photos and the on-site assessments and follow-up inspections, but we have a hotline. Anytime, year-round, people have a question, they call us and we answer the question. They send us an email to our info account, and we're there to answer questions. They need a site visit, we're there to support them. So homeowners really appreciate this in-depth, ongoing, high-quality technical assistance for professionals. We've got PhDs, former fire chiefs, former district foresters. This is a profession that needs to assist. Homeowners need assistance to do this work properly. They need the follow-up and support, the recognition. So essentially the idea, we do lots of surveys, but we're trying to increase the benefits of the individuals that take action, to recognize that with a certification process and to decrease the cost. So that's comprehensive. I haven't talked a lot about the realtor angle, but the idea is really to provide that support for homeowners to get those questions answered. And yes, it's intensive. There's a lot of homeowners out there. And so you need big staffs, you need resources. You can't do this based on, from our perspective, just volunteers working once in a while part year. This is a year-round, full-time program. So if someone needs an assessment, it's just not available 1 month a year. It's we're year-round, 24/7, every day working on this program. Next slide. Just a couple words on funding. It's the homeowners that are paying the vast majority of these costs, but we do get support from Boulder County to run the program. And we also have received funding from the state and FEMA. Really appreciate those federal and state partners. And the idea is that funding provides the technical assistance that's really valuable, and to the early adopters, some financial assistance in terms of doing some of the mitigation measures. One of the policies that Outthink Wildfire mentioned was the codes. So Boulder County also have codes that are incorporated. We've, since 1993, required new homes to be constructed with ignition-resistant materials. So our wildfire mitigation requirements are incorporated into Wildfire Partners. So it's both a voluntary and a regulatory program. Next slide. In time frame, we talked about 30 years with Outthink Wildfire. We're trying to be a little bit more ambitious here, but the idea in 20 years that we'll get this accomplished. And looking at that long term allows us to build this comprehensive program and in-depth support. I think too often we look at an annual planning cycle and that's limited. Yeah, if we're looking just what we can do in a year, maybe we can do some educational events. But if we're going to solve the problem and address the policies in Outthink Wildfire, we need to think long term and develop these comprehensive programs that really get to the root of the problem and have us a chance of achieving those goals. So here's a picture of the Cold Springs fire home that worked with Wildfire Partners. They weren't certified, but they had spent a lot of time and effort doing mitigation measures recommended for Wildfire Partners. And the home survived due to the mitigation and in combination, in this case, in the mitigation and suppression support. But like we talk about, suppression and mitigation go together and really increases the chance of the home surviving. Next slide. So we're making progress. In 7 years, I mean, we started this, we spent 2013 designing, launched in 2014. We're up to 2,400 participants now. So in a 20-year cycle, we're a third of the way there. So we're making progress. So the idea of starting now, there's a lot of work to do. So the sooner you start, the quicker you're going to get there. So start now. The picture here, if you're wondering, we've made a lot of progress making automobiles safer. Over time, government, consumer groups, the industry working together, and we see vast improvements in automobile safety. It's much tougher making our homes safer, many more challenges. We can talk about, when there's an automobile accident, there's a police report, there's a traffic cam, there's eyewitnesses. People can see that, and people want those safer cars. We've got a lot of work to do to make our homes safer. A lot of challenges. Don't want to say this is easy, but we think the approach that we're working on in partnership with insurance companies and lots of different partners with Wildfire Partners it's been successful, and it's a model for other communities that they can adopt. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we can use this model to achieve the policies in Outthink Wildfire. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Jim. As I said, really a gold standard program. I know we've had Jim go to California. He's been to other states. He's talked to other communities in Colorado, which really pattern after Wildfire Partners. They all can have their own customization, but those core elements of that credible on-site assessment, following the IBHS science, having comprehensive mitigation, that's all something that really helps marry up what the insurance industry looks at that reduces risk with what we're asking homeowners to do. So that's been a critical piece for us to be able to really blueprint that program. Since we are going to go to the Q&A portion of the program, and I do have a question to kick us off, but we did have one question in the chat box that I think is a fairly easy answer. It's one I could answer because I very much support, and the industry very much supports, both Firewise, which is NFPA's terrific program throughout the country that mobilizes our homeowners on the ground. And what is the difference between that and then Wildfire Partners, which is the Boulder County program? So I thought that I would turn that over to Jim Pauley and Jim Webster to address that question that came from Paul Martin, who's with the Reinsurers Association of America, one of our associate members of RMIA.
Well, I'm going to guess, Jim Webster, you're probably more familiar with both programs than I am necessarily as much as Wildfire Partners. I'll just mention as I toss it over to you that I think the exciting thing I saw, a lot of exciting things in what you presented, but the idea that you've integrated into the building codes there, I think is an incredible, part of the process. And that's a model to be looked at, I think.
Thanks. And yeah, we have Firewise communities in Boulder County. So a Firewise community works at a larger scale, so it's a community scale, and it does some of the same education and mitigation work, but really it recognizes community action. At Wildfire Partners, we're working at the individual parcel level. So in a community, in a Firewise community, you can have well-mitigated structures and poorly mitigated structures. And so Wildfire Partners works with the individual homeowners to retrofit their home and look at their home ignition zone, look at the defensible space and the actions on that individual property and trying to get that, as ignition resistant to reduce that ignition potential. So we're working on the individual level. And that's part of the benefit of us, why we're attractive to the insurance companies, because sometimes, if you look at a community level or a zip code, that gives you some idea of risk, but we now need to look at that individual home, and that translates into mitigation actions from the homeowner. So I think we're working at different scales.
And as stakeholders, we'd say not one or the other, but both. We need to have that community level participation, education, mitigation, and then we also strongly support putting in an ongoing community mitigation program like Wildfire Partners. They really work hand in hand with one another. So the insurance industry, both financially and from a commitment standpoint, supports both of those types of programs and is a big promoter of Wildfire. We have Wildfire Prep Day coming up here in May, and that's something that the insurance companies strongly support as well. So with that, I am going to throw out a question to each of the panelists. What do you see as the greatest challenge and barrier to providing adequate support, both to the local communities to implement a community wildfire mitigation program, and then give the homeowners those resources they need to reduce their individual risk? How can these tenets of Outthink Wildfire play into that? Maybe I'll throw that to Roy first, and then go Jim Polly, and then Jim Webster.
I think fundamentally you're asking the $64 million question. So as you were just describing in the last response, wildfire is unique. I don't see this when I deal with hail or wind or even flood, because it requires action at the structure, at the parcel level. It requires action in the neighborhood community level, and it requires action at the ecosystem. And there's a push and pull that happens in the public policy space because people want to do those things that their constituents care about. And how do you get constituents to care about them? Well, they need to understand it. And wildfire is not a simple phenomenon to communicate to folks. All too often people think it's actually a wall of flame that gets to their home that causes the ignition. And while that can happen 10, 15% of the time, it's usually those embers that pick up and loft that actually cause the initial ignition that causes that next cascade. So what we have said is, yes, there's a lot of complexity. I can walk you through 8 different angles in terms of hardening and mitigation activities, but we have to make it digestible and show people what the next 3 things they can do. What are the next 3 things they can do at their structure, the kind of thing that Wildfire Partners will show up and help someone with. The next 3 things that the community can do, the kind of thing you would see with the Firewise community. And then as we start to look at the ecosystem, it's a more complex piece as we deal with both federal lands as well as public lands that are owned by the state or the community, and how all those pieces come together to get to all of the above. So all the above can become really complex, but what we just need to make sure is stop waiting for the first person to take action and get all of these lanes to take action.
So Roy, I'll just dovetail. Oh, I'm sorry, Carol, did you want to?
No, I wanted to toss it to you. Go ahead.
I'll just dovetail in right behind. I think one of the most interesting things as I listened today, Roy, was the slide that you had up that talked about what the homeowner view of the threat of wildfire was. And I do think as much work as we all have done, there is still a bit of a state of denial, right? That so many people are in, that it's always going to be somebody else. And one of the things I think mentally that we have to shift people to is the idea of, look, you want to do this to protect yourself, that we want to shift this into, you want to do this because it's your responsibility to do this. It's your responsibility, sure, to your family and to yourself, but it's your responsibility to your community, because wildfire is one of those things that what your neighbor does or doesn't do can have a significant impact on you. And the idea of beginning to get people to understand the responsibility aspect of this, I think is important. The other thing that I think is a barrier and a challenge, and it's often a place that people don't want to talk about, but I think Outthink Wildfire has been about talking about some of those things, is are there requirements for things? I'll use Jim's program, from the standpoint of Wildfire Partners, of are there requirements that need to be in place where it's like this, as part of this, just like a requirement to build your home safely from an electrical system and a plumbing system and to take care of those things, the requirement word becomes often something that people want to avoid, but I think is absolutely critical to this conversation. And we need to talk about the idea that for the love that we have in living in the WUI, because it's away from things and it's beautiful, there's also a set of responsibilities and requirements that go along with that. And I think that's another one of those shifts in the conversation if we really want to make a difference in this overall. And that's why I was so happy to see that the building code, Jim, as you talked about, was now involved in that. And I think there's more of that we can do, and really changing that mindset of the homeowner, that it's a responsibility, right? And it's not just, oh, this would be nice because wildfires are a bad thing, but it's really part of your responsibility to the community.
I just agree with Jim and Roy in the sense of following up on that changing of that responsibility and that homeowner knowledge and understanding. Too often homeowners see it as luck as what determines whether a home survives or not. And the before and after pictures are helpful. The videos of the laboratory experiments are helpful, but just following up on the automobile analogy, it would be great if we could have, live video of homes surviving wildfire or being destroyed by wildfire next to each other real time. Of course, there's technical challenges with that, logistical challenges. There's smoke in the air. There's other priorities of firefighters, and we don't want to get in the way, but having real-time video evidence of mitigation working, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Seeing is believing. If homeowners saw that, they can believe it reading it. But I think the more evidence, the more research, and will help homeowners more readily adopt these practices.
Thanks, Jim. And I think that's what's so key to the length of time Wildfire Partners has been in place. We're starting to be able to see how those fires play out with the mitigation and the certified homes. That's critical. We never promise people that we'll save their homes with the proper mitigation. Put the odds in your favor. And that's really what we need to be doing as homeowners and communities. Jim, I have the next question for you from the chat box from Michelle Steinberg of NFPA. Does the final report on individual property mitigation get plugged into the realtor info for multiple listing services, the MLS? And is there any rules about hazard and mitigation disclosure in Boulder or in Colorado?
I think that's me. There's two Jims, but
Jim Webster.
Right, I got that. So we've worked with realtors, and so it's possible for a seller to upload the certificate in the MLS process. We haven't been successful yet in having that as a checkbox, a searchable field, where someone who wants to search just those certified properties could do so. So we're still need work to do on the realtor end, but right now, homeowners do, it's a benefit of the program and the certification. Homeowners are using the certification to sell and get increased prices for those homes. But they're uploading that themselves to the MLS listing, the certification process. And then, not like California in terms of the disclosure, in terms of the wildfire risk here in the state of Colorado and Boulder.
Thanks, Jim. And I would like to give a shout out to our Colorado Association of Realtors. CAR is a key partner with the insurance industry and our fire officials with their Project Wildfire. We've been partnering with the realtors now over the past couple of years. It really is a unique national model because we know that those conversations that matter about mitigation happen with your insurance agent. They happen with your realtor when you're buying and selling a home. So we just really appreciate their partnership. We actually partnered on a Colorado wildfire insurance property and preparedness guide. We do have copies of those available through the Realtors Association, then also through RMIA. So I think that is just critical partnership that we're able to do from a public sector standpoint. I would also like to recognize Representative Shannon Byrd is on the line, and we very much appreciate the representative joining us. We know how busy she is, and she plays a critical role on some key committees for us as a decision maker. So very much wanted to recognize Representative Byrd for being on the line and taking the time out to talk through these issues and dialogue on it. So if you do have any questions, please let us know, but we really appreciate you being here and being part of the conversation. The next question I had in the chat box is, what is the insurance industry response to these programs, from Doug Compton, who with Centennial Insurance. I know Doug very, very well for many years, even when he worked at Farmers Insurance. So I think that is directed at me. And Doug, what I would say is, to Jim's point, with programs like a Wildfire Partners, one of the key questions we get from different communities, from fire chiefs is, sometimes the insurance requirements differ from what the fire department's telling them, what the fire officials are telling, what the State Forest Service is telling them. With programs like these that are really based on the IBHS science, they're more comprehensive, they're on site, they're ongoing. We're providing them resources to do comprehensive mitigation, not just kind of a pat on the back. These really are going to reduce risk. And that we've built this partnership, the insurance companies are more and more recognizing, hey, if we partner with Wildfire Partners, we can accept their certification to get and keep that insurance. Jim, I don't know if you want to speak to that. Jim always says to me, I'm actually happy when the insurance companies send out a notification letter, because then they call me. Jim,
so we've worked with a number of partners and have recognition of the certificate. I mean, USA has said anywhere in the country that has a Wildfire Partner certificate, they'll honor it. So we work with State Farm and Allstate and others on our advisory committee to get the certificate recognized, because that's key for a homeowner. Homeowner doesn't want to invest a lot of time, money, and effort, and then later to be told that, hey, that mitigation wasn't the right kind of mitigation, we want you to do something else. So that having that certainty up front is key for homeowners.
Yeah, and I think that that's, again, these conversations are important for us to be having, but we're having them in Colorado. And we really, I think, are leaders, even on a national scale, in trying to really engage as the insurance industry with NFPA, with programs like Jim's, with the local fire departments. I serve on the Colorado Fire Commission. So we're at the table, and I think that's going to help homeowners on both sides of that equation. I don't see anything else in the chat box. I did want to round it out with, how can forest practitioners insurance work better together to convince and educate homeowners that mitigation makes a difference in reducing their wildfire risk? That may seem like a simple question, but I think it's also one of the key questions. And I'd like to throw that to each of the panelists just to get your summary thoughts on that. Roy, starting with you.
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of engagement that happens. We're about to kick off a project here at the Research Center that partners with the U.S. Forest Service and with their fire lab, and we look at those kinds of pieces. And so on the technical side, I think there is quite a bit of interaction. But I think, honestly, we are not yet meeting the male on how to effectively communicate. The days of Smokey the Bear have long since passed. That's not sufficient to the piece that we are in today. It was important, but it's not sufficient. So how do we keep moving down this road? And I do think that it's actually through convenings like this one where we start connecting more of the dots, because we need, yes, the U.S. Forest Service, but also the state forester out communicating and working these dimensions and understanding, yes, there are environmental impacts that need to be considered, but yet the importance of managing the fuel load, particularly dealing with the dead and diseased pieces, that it just serves as kindling that fans fires as they go through. Again, I think most humans and most Americans are trying to find a simple way with the next two steps to take, and this one is far more complicated. There's a broader set of variables in play.
And then Jim Pauley.
Yeah, so it's an interesting point. Part of what was Outthink Wildfire was about was to help facilitate these broader conversations. Some of the things are more provocative than others, and quite intentionally so, because it is the conversations, just like the ones that you're having today, that are going to make the difference. I also think there's another group that I would offer into that list, Carol, that you even mentioned, and that is getting the fire service involved in this as well. One of the things that I hear over and over again as we talk about wildfire is, I'm not worried because the fire department's going to come and save me. And while again, we do a huge amount of work with the fire service. They're some of our best stakeholders and partners that we work with, and they do a tremendous job. Most fire departments also have that honest view of, that's not what's going to happen in this case. And when you want to talk about how can I use mitigation, the fire department can play a key role in that, because they're one of those trusted resources that the homeowner already sees today. And we need them talking about the same things that we are, the hazard ignition zone. We have a credential now for a certified wildfire mitigation specialist. And we see people beginning to take that credential, which again adds to that value of the conversation that's having with the homeowners. So I do think it's facilitating these conversations, but I do think the fire service can play a big role because they're so well respected already by so much of the homeowner community.
And Jim Webster?
Yeah, I agree in terms of, not just educating, but if we're empowering homeowners, we have to be able to answer their questions and provide that technical explanation. If we just say, if as a government land use department, you do it because it's a requirement, or we just give people that information from insurance companies. So this is a requirement, do it, or you're non-renewed. So providing that empowerment, that education to homeowners. I mean, so working together, local governments and insurance companies, to provide that explanation and education to homeowners, then they're more willing to take the action. I mean, some people think if we're out requiring mitigation, everybody's going to hate us. We really have found tremendous support from all our homeowners because they appreciate all the science and all the technical information and the support. So if you do it the right way, homeowners will support it and take action. If we just come across and say, okay, this is our requirement, and expect people to do it and understand it and not complain, it's not going to happen. So really engaging, empowering, and working with homeowners in an effective way is how insurance companies and local governments can come together more effectively to do that. It's tough, working with local governments. There's a lot of local governments out there. Working with insurance companies, there are a lot of insurance companies out there. How do we all work together? It's hard, but we spent a year sort of designing the wheel, putting things together with our app and our program and standards and partnerships. We don't want every local government to have to recreate that process. It's pretty intensive. So hopefully we can be used as a model and speed up that coordination between insurance companies, fire districts, and local government.
And I did promise Daniel Beveridge, who is the hazard mitigation specialist with the Colorado State Forest Service, since I brought up fire practitioners and our partnerships with the State Forest Service is so critical. Daniel, did you want to weigh in on that? We've so appreciated our partnership with you over the year. You and I kind of a road show we do along with the realtors. Daniel, can we have you just briefly speak to that question, how we can do even a better job of helping homeowners?
Sure, Carol, can I confirm that you can hear me all right?
I can.
Okay, great. Thanks for the mention, Carol. It's great to be involved here. I appreciate you inviting me to say a few words. When it comes to finding ways to leverage all of these resources that we have, it certainly can be overwhelming for a lot of homeowners to sort through all of these different programs. But realistically, as we've found with our partnership with the Colorado Association of Realtors, there's not a necessity that we necessarily have the insurance practitioners or the realtors themselves be the subject matter experts, of course, but to be able to provide that linkage to our local resources, whether Colorado State Forest Service employees, county officials in certain parts of the state, fire service professionals, just like Jim Pauly had mentioned. There's such a broad diversity of folks that can provide this information statewide. Finding out how to establish that linkage can be challenging because it is so differentiated from one part of the state to the next. But I feel like we really are getting to a good positive point in which we're providing those linkages. So thanks for the call. I hope that satisfactorily answered your question. There's a lot of work to be done, but we have a good trajectory, I believe.
And as Daniel and I have talked about many times, we have just such good organic partnerships and communications and education and outreach that we're able to do because we have these relationships and they're ongoing relationships. I would be remiss if I didn't ask the last question from Bobby Baca. She's the property and casualty supervisor with the Colorado Division of Insurance. This would be to you, Jim Webster. Are you aware of any other Colorado counties that have created a program similar to Wildfire Partners?
Yeah, Eagle County, and they call it Real Fire. There's 6 counties in the western part of the state that the West Region Wildfire Council is incorporating parts of the program. Jefferson County is looking at programs, and the Elk Creek Fire District has a program as well. So there are programs growing around the state.
And thank you so much. And we are reaching the end of our program. Such great information. I think as somebody that is a true believer, along with my other stakeholders and my insurance partners, is we need to really invest. That's our time, our energy, our funding, all in programs that make sense. Outthink Wildfire really gives us a soapbox, a strategy to do that, where we really looking at the fundamentals of how are we going to do a call to action, engage all levels of government, all levels of public and private sector partners to really understand what mitigation means when it comes to wildfire. And then how can we help our homeowners, again, before the path of the fire is coming toward their home, having helped put the odds in their favor. So again, thank you all so much for our panel. Such a great dialogue. Again, it's the start of the conversation. We never end it, as I can tell you, my 23 years in this job. This is an ongoing conversation, but I think we're making a lot of headway. And unfortunately, we're making a lot of headway because we have to. We are in a dire situation in Colorado, and we really need to up the ante on this conversation. So again, thank you to everybody that's participating. Again, all of those links, we're going to be sending up a follow-up email to everybody on this call and to our distribution with NFPA's Outthink Wildfire policy papers. Also, you can always visit RMIA.org, which has tons of insurance information and ways you can get more engaged in the insurance industry and our legislative grassroots and even our small donor committee. So again, thank you, everyone. I would like to absolutely thank our sponsors of this series of legislative grassroots sessions. They make this all possible. And thank you to my board members and the insurance companies. They make me possible. So again, everyone, thank you so much. And we will be sending you more information on some of the programs that we have coming up heading into April and May. But again, everyone have a great day. And here we go. Let's keep this conversation going.
Thanks.